Professor Paul Gunashekhar is a well-known authority on the teaching of English. Today, he will be speaking on enabling teachers to grow and flourish. And I think that's a very positive note on which to start the conference. Professor Paul Gunashekhar has been teaching English, training teachers of English, and developing instruction material for English language teaching for over 43 years. Educated in Bangalore and London, he was a professor in the Department of Materials Development, Testing and Evaluation at the English and Foreign Language University, formerly CFIL, Hyderabad. He has been Proctor, Dean of English Language Education, and Dean of Publishing at EFLU. Professor Gunashekhar has authored, co-authored, and edited over 200 English teaching books, besides audio materials for school and video programs for colleges. His achievements are many, and for every one that I have mentioned, there are a number which I have left off. On account of paucity of time, I've had to be as brief as possible, and I hope I'm forgiven for that. I hope, because he has to leave by 2, but I hope that at the end of the session, you will be able to ask any questions that you may have. Before we start, I request those who are present here to kindly mute their cell phones. Thank you. Now I would like to request Professor Paul Gunashekhar to give the keynote address.
Madam Chairperson, fellow practitioners of English, ladies and gentlemen, sorry I'm sitting and doing this session partly because we thought that I could use the few slides I have to support what I'm saying, but that is going to cause a bit of a problem because it's not large enough. Maybe the one sitting in front Raju, can you see it? I'm sure Dr. Prabhu can't see what it is. So I'm so sorry about this. And thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. It's a privilege to have so many friends sitting in the audience, and it's a particular privilege to have Dr. Prabhu here in the audience, somebody who has mentored so many of us in the ELT fraternity. So thank you, sir, for being with us today. I had a couple of chats with Professor Rajgopal and Dr. Karunakaran about what I should be talking about, and we agreed that I should focus on the profound impact that teachers have on learners and classroom transactions, and the unrelenting need for high quality teachers. A caveat: inescapably, my perspective will be strongly influenced by my own professional orientation and experience as a teacher of English. But I assume some of the things, or most of the things I'm going to refer to, do apply to teachers in general. I once asked a group of high school students to describe the ideal teacher, the perfect teacher. We had a brainstorming session, and they said the perfect teacher should be hardworking, humorous, critical, polite, imaginative, ambitious, punctual, authoritative, calm, experienced, supportive, decisive, generous, sociable, considerate, well-organized, diplomatic, tidy, analytical, articulate, far-sighted, enthusiastic, flexible, methodical, innovative, introspective, patient, and proactive. Do you realize how high learners' expectations are when they think of their teachers, and what a huge challenge it is for us teachers to live up to expectations? Incidentally, you can add the word absent-minded to that list. I myself have become quite forgetful. Last month, on the morning of the 18th, actually 18th October, my wife kissed me, gave me a beautifully wrapped present and exclaimed, "Happy wedding anniversary." And I responded graciously, "Thanks, darling. Do remind me to give you a present on your wedding anniversary." Essentially then, the list of adjectives I read out refers to the qualities of the effective teacher. And I'm not suggesting that every teacher possess every adjective in that list, but obviously it's a list that is pretty comprehensive. Chris Kyrico, those of you who have read him, the person who writes extensively on teachers and teaching skills, etc., but not necessarily about English teachers, captures the essence of these qualities in the following 7 attributes that he says a competent teacher should possess. Establishing an orderly and attractive learning environment, concentrating on teaching and learning by maximizing learning time and maintaining an academic emphasis, delivering well-organized and well-structured lessons coupled with clarity of purpose, conveying high expectations and providing intellectual challenge, monitoring progress and providing quick corrective feedback, and establishing clear and fair discipline. It's not surprising that the Kyrico list that includes self-evident truths are reflected in the basic areas of concern embodied in the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act of 2009. I've always believed in teachers referring to national documents and not simply treat the prescribed textbook as the only thing that is worth respecting. So it's in that spirit that I'm referring to the RTE Act. If you recall, the RTE Act emphasizes a set of areas. One, ensuring that the school curriculum is in conformity with the values enshrined in the Constitution of India. 2, working towards the all-round development of the child. 3, building the child's knowledge, potential, and talent. 4, helping children to develop both their physical and mental abilities to the fullest extent. 5, encouraging children to learn through activity, play, discovery, and exploration in a threat-free environment. 6, as far as it is practicable, ensuring that the medium of instruction in the early years is in the child's first language. 7, applying the principles of fair and regular evaluation in the context of testing and tracking the academic growth of the child. And lastly, freeing children from anxiety, fear, and trauma, and helping them express their views freely. This last point about enabling children to express themselves freely in a threat-free environment is particularly important. I I remember something that happened in the late 80s in a school in Coimbatore. I was invited to do a 2-day workshop for teachers of English in Coimbatore with this particular school playing the host. I arrived the day before the workshop, and since I had lots of time that day, I decided to go across to the school to see what the venue was like, what the arrangements were going to be, and so on. The principal, a lady, was very gracious, very kind. She spent a lot of time with me discussing matters of mutual importance in her office, and at some point she said, "Would you like a short conducted tour, Professor?" I said, "Sure." So we walked down a couple of corridors. The doors appeared to be shut, and I occasionally heard a voice, an adult voice, but generally very quiet, and the principal saying, "This is class 3, that's the laboratory, that's the library," etc. When we got back to the office, I stupidly said, "Can I ask you a question? Why is today a holiday?" And she said, "Professor Gunashekhar, you've paid me the supreme compliment. You could have heard a pin drop, couldn't you? That's the kind of discipline I maintain in the school. The only person who is allowed to speak in the classroom is the teacher." Now, obviously, that left me very disturbed. The next day, soon after the introductory kind of session, I had to do a demonstration lesson. That's the familiar word, isn't it? We are in a very close to a demonstration school here, right? For an hour with a set of 25 children from class 4 to be chosen by the principal. There were 2 sections. I said, "You send any 25 because they're all going to be strangers." And we set up in a hall like this, a kind of a fishbowl with the 75 or 80 teachers sitting around the hall, and a small little classroom area for me and the students to spend an hour or so. And at the appointed time, when I gave my signal, 25 children walked in. Each of them had the index finger stuck to their lips, right? They walked in, trooped in, and sat at the desks. And it took me at least 10 minutes for me to actually get them to drop the fingers from the lips and respond with a yes or no to whatever I was desperately trying to discuss with them. But gradually, they opened up. Children are children. You give them an opportunity to be themselves. They are wonderful. And it soon came to a point where I couldn't get a word in edgeways. They were doing all the talking. And the lady principal was sitting right there in the front, and I was observing her all the while. The more the students spoke, the wider her mouth opened, and I must tell you, I've never had greater pleasure, enjoyed greater pleasure than watching that happen. I don't mean any disrespect to teachers, but she had the good grace to later tell me, "I think I must change my attitude to this notion of discipline," right? So I think some of these issues need to be addressed when we think of teaching. The National Curriculum Framework, and we still refer to it in the absence of a new framework appearing, the 2005 framework, highlighted 3 systemic concerns of teacher education which are still relevant. One, in current teacher education practices, knowledge is treated as given. It's embedded in the curriculum and accepted without question. 2, The language proficiency of the teacher needs to be significantly increased from its what they call abysmally low levels, and the centrality of language in the curriculum ought to be acknowledged. And 3, teacher education programs do not offer any scope for student teachers to reflect on their classroom experiences, thereby failing to empower them as agents of change. English in India represents a wide range of use and ownership, from a foreign language through to a second language and a first language. Consequently, the contexts in which English is taught reflect this range and diversity and have implications for the teacher's linguistic proficiency and professional competence. And in this regard, the National Focus Group on the Teaching of English position paper, I always refer to it as the Amritavali paper because she was the chairperson of that focus group, envisioned the route teacher education should take, and I quote, "Teacher education needs to be ongoing and on-site as well as preparatory. Emphasis must be laid on teacher proficiency in or familiarity with the language, as the teacher is often a role model. Proficiency and professional awareness are equally to be promoted, the latter, professional awareness, to be imparted where necessary through the teacher's own languages." The National Curriculum Framework for Teacher Education picked this up and elaborated this national vision of teacher education by foregrounding 5 principles that should inform the enterprise. So this is NCFTE 2009. The integrative and eclectic nature of teacher education, its liberal, humanistic, and non-didactic underpinnings, non-didactic. 3, its multicultural and context-sensitive facets, the necessity for it to be transacted in a diversity of learning spaces and curriculum sites apart from the classroom, and most importantly, reflective practice to be its chief aim. It's important, therefore, to note that curriculums are located in specific socio-cultural milieus. And to be sure that our curriculum is rooted in social reality, we need to draw lessons from national documents like the Constitution of India, the National Policy of Education, 1986, the draft National Policy of Education that the Kasturi Rangan Committee is currently fine-tuning, and the National Curriculum Framework of 2005. And among the several fundamental duties, the Constitution lists the promotion of harmony and the spirit of brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, regional or sectional diversities, which is particularly important, you must have noticed, in these rather difficult and unsettled times. The renunciation of practices derogatory to the dignity of women, again so relevant to the overtly patriarchal society that we live in. The need to value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture, the development of a scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform, and the compulsion to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity, so that the nation constantly rises to higher levels of endeavor and achievement. Now, building on the points I've just made, let me briefly refer to 5 cardinal principles of a language curriculum that are of relevance to classroom practitioners and pedagogy. First one, which all national documents on education stress, focus on the learner. Curriculum development should put learners first, recognizing and building on their prior knowledge and experience, and responding sensitively to their needs. Different learning styles as well as pace of learning need to be acknowledged and accommodated, both in learning contexts and in the attainment of language proficiency. 2, the notion of creativity. Learners need to be encouraged to formulate and express their own ideas rather than be coerced into converging on their teacher's views all the time. The emphasis, therefore, should be on the selection of texts and creation of materials that will promote divergent thinking. It follows that the perception of teachers as dispensers of knowledge will need to change to one where learners are valued as equals in the language classroom. 3, intellectual development. Learners should be provided a platform to chisel their thinking and urged to make meaningful responses in the language classroom to issues of national concern. The issues themselves can be chosen from the Constitution and important policy documents. In fact, the NCERT textbooks draw on this list, namely India's freedom movement, constitutional obligations, national identity, India's common cultural heritage, egalitarianism, democracy and secularism, equality of sexes, protection of the environment, removal of social barriers, observance of the small family norm, and inculcation of a scientific temper. Essentially, the purpose is to use textual content to remove pernicious prejudices and stereotypes that have been transmitted through the social environment and the accident of birth. We remember what the remarkable freedom fighter Nelson Mandela once said, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Number 4, self-dependence. Learners should be trained to take responsibility for their own learning so that they can move smoothly from a marked dependence on the teacher to a level of autonomy where reading, in particular, for profit and pleasure, and self-study habits, in particular, have been firmly established. The need to refer to the immense range of reference materials now available, from the dictionary to the internet, should obviously be stressed, and this also implies that the traditional omniscient and infallible teacher needs a professional makeover. It helps to remind ourselves periodically that we are not clones of Oliver Goldsmith's village schoolmaster in the deserted village. Remember Goldsmith exclaiming, "And still they gazed, and still the wonder grew, that one small head could carry all he knew." Principle number 5, liberality. Learners should be persuaded to regard English not merely as a utilitarian acquisition, but also as a major contributor to personal development and as a valuable tool for understanding India's pluralistic society. They need to recognize the significance of using the language to develop a mutual respect for diverse religious and value systems and the varied cultural and language traditions in the country. Textual content should therefore reiterate the mutual interdependence of humans and reinforce what Rabindranath Tagore's ideal was, which was to achieve, as he said, we achieve our greatest happiness when we realize ourselves through others. What we quickly need to now look at are the notions of professional competence, professionalism, and quality with regard to teacher education. Let's use Michael Wallace's well-known explanation of professional competence. He uses the term professional competence in two senses. In one sense, it's the indication, in some formal way, that an individual has met certain minimum requirements for the exercise of his or her profession. Thus, the evidence that one has the competence to teach lies in the certificate obtained at the end of a teacher education course. And in this sense, professional competence is a fixed obstacle. Once it has been successfully negotiated, there is no going back on it. And Wallace calls this professional adequacy initial competence. There is another sense of professional competence in which it is a moving target or a horizon towards which professionals travel all their professional life, but which is never really reached. Competence here is vastly different from adequacy or even proficiency. It has what Wallace calls the stronger force of expertise, something that we associate with Dr. Prabhu. Viewed from this perspective, professional certification is not a terminal point, but a point of departure. If the second sense of professional competence, that is expertise, is as valid and important as the first, then it is important that equipping teachers and trainee teachers with the techniques to go on developing competence in that sense must be an important component of a teacher education program. In a paper presented at the first Teacher Educators Conference in Hyderabad in 2011, something that EFLU and the British Council conducted for 5 years in succession, Amol Padwar, many of you know him, pointed to the emerging trend of India of viewing teaching as a profession analogous to medicine, law, and engineering. He compared teaching with the other professions in terms of professional preparation and development, and argued that continuing professional development is crucial in teaching because the pre-service education program and even the induction training are woefully inadequate. He argued that professional development is essentially a personal journey and that teachers need to work out their personal meaning, agenda, and action plan for a meaningful and sustainable professional development. The first step towards quality assurance is to move away from the belief that good teachers are naturals, right? Therefore requiring no specific training or education. Such a belief is detrimental to creating an image of teachers as true professionals on a par with competent doctors, lawyers, and engineers. We need to work towards identifying teacher professionalism and establishing professional standards in teacher education. And we can do this by adopting one of two perspectives on quality assurance, or both. One, externally driven quality control, assessment, and accreditation, and two, internally driven quality and evaluation. When quality assurance is external to the institution, assessment and accreditation by an agency like NCTE or NAC is the primary means by which providers of teacher education programs can demonstrate their accountability and their compliance with established professional standards. And this would include a mandatory inspection, combining direct observation of different aspects of an institution's activities with verification of the systems of academic scholarship and management. This process can be accompanied by an ongoing, internally driven system in the belief that quality assurance is not an end in itself, but a tool for personal and institutional development. It then becomes the responsibility of the administrators to develop a holistic approach to quality maintenance and accordingly put quality systems in place. On their part, the faculty should cohere and work together as a community, commit themselves to reaching acceptable standards of performance, and give priority to continuing professional development, or CPD as we always refer to, and to the updating of their professional skills. Evidently, continuing professional development is the way forward to uphold and enhance the quality of teaching. And I thought I'd suggest 7 steps, very familiar steps, that we can take to implement CPD. And I believe they're all doable. 1. Setting up an induction scheme and a support system for the new entrant to the faculty, college, school, university. Instead of being sent to the classroom directly after being recruited, the new teacher needs to be given time and institutional support to acclimatize to the new milieu. The support system should include mentoring, whereby an experienced teacher shows the recruit the ropes. I often think of my own experience in this regard. When I got my first job as a lecturer in the Vishweshwarapuram College of Arts, Science and Commerce in Bangalore, 200 years ago, by the way, I reported around 10 o'clock, because I was asked to the head of the department, Dr. Lakshmi Narayana, who gave me a cup of tea, chatted with me, and suddenly at 10:25 he said, "There's a first year BSc General English class at 10:30, why don't you go and take it?" So I said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. He said, "No, you'll manage, just an hour." And he picked up a copy of Wren and Martin and gave it to me. "This will help you. Go there." I still don't know what I did. It's all a blur. I shut it out of my memory if I can, right? And I compare that with what happened a year later when I reported to CIFR, and Dr. Tikku, P.T. George, A.E. Subramaniam, Esther Ramani, Shipra Roy Chowdhury, Jay Sheelan, Amritavali, you name it. They were all there waiting for me to arrive, because I was regarded as Professor Bhaskar, WWS Bhaskar's blue-eyed boy, and they made sure for the next 2 weeks that I was actually settled in. Before the beginning of the 3rd week, when Dr. Tikku said, "I think you can now start doing some materials, right? You now know the place, etc." Now, I think that helped me. I got to know not just the colleagues, but the institution, and I got to meet a whole lot of non-teaching staff and the PG diploma participants, and that I thought was real mentoring. 2, developing a vibrant pan-India online teacher network for both new and experienced practitioners. As we all know, the majority of teachers work in intellectual and academic isolation. It makes sense, therefore, for practitioners to set up or join an online teacher network like the LTI Google groups, and there are several in the country, and EFLU's ELE Research Scholars Forum, and several of our old research scholars are here who still operate through that particular forum. Remember, the National Council of Teacher Education urges teachers to break out of intellectual isolation and share experiences and insights with others in the field, both teachers and academics. Third suggestion, encouraging the faculty to do specialized online and distance education programs, courses, at the best Indian and foreign universities. Every teacher surely can be encouraged to do a comprehensive distance education program like EFLU's postgraduate certificate in the teaching of English, as well as short specialized online courses in various aspects of pedagogy at the best foreign universities, and that's happening already at EFLU, perhaps with the sponsorship of bodies like the UGC, the British Council, or the US Regional English Language Office. Renault, in fact, has sponsored 8 of our junior EFLU colleagues to do highly intensive 6-week online programs in areas like English for academic purposes, teaching English to young learners, and so on. This, I believe, will lead to enrichment of both practice and theory. It might also interest you to know that 4,000 untrained teachers from classes 1 to 8 in private schools in Telangana have to clear a diploma course in elementary education offered by the National Institute of Open Schooling before 31st March 2019 if they want to continue in service. This diploma course is a facility provided by the central government through an amendment to RTE, which emphatically states that there should be no untrained in-service teachers in the country. Fourth suggestion, sponsoring faculty participation in national and international conferences, seminars, and now increasingly popular, webinars. Since the knowledge base of teaching is always in a state of flux, it's imperative that teachers are encouraged to participate in relevant academic events like the IATEFL, TESOL, and TECH conferences, and several LTI and NCRT conferences like the one we are now attending, to enable them to update their professional expertise and network with fellow practitioners. It's through mutual sharing of ideas and experience that professional growth happens. Suggestion 5. Introducing a system of peer appraisal to promote professional quality assurance. Not everyone is happy with this suggestion. I've discussed this with fellow academics. It would help, I feel, immensely if a well-planned peer appraisal system were put in place in school and higher education. Having their academic and pedagogic activities monitored, constructively commented on, and supported by colleagues will contribute significantly to a teacher's professional growth. Personally, I benefited greatly in the first few years of my career at CIFL, in particular from the informal feedback I received from a host of colleagues about my teaching, teacher training, and materials production, including Professor Rajgopal here. Suggestion number 6, ensuring reactive remediation based on student appraisal of faculty. Now that is quite controversial. Student appraisal of faculty. Learners, we acknowledge, are a vital source of feedback on a teacher's academic performance and professional conduct. And some institutions like EFLU have an appraisal system in place where learner feedback at the end of a course helps the teacher concerned to not only take corrective action but also spurs him or her on to succeed as a professional. Of course, it's a matter of debate whether student appraisal should be a criterion for a teacher's career advancement. That is a different matter altogether. And suggestion number 7, encouraging teachers to do courses in critical thinking and problem solving, which increasingly is happening in Europe. Training programs that include a prominent component on thinking skills have been shown to have a beneficial impact on practicing teachers and by extension on learners too. Wasn't it Socrates who said, "I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think"? In his introduction to that classic, How We Think, which we still refer to, the 1933 book by John Dewey, Dewey says there are 4 different senses in which we use the term thinking. 1, thinking as a stream of consciousness and the everyday uncontrolled coursing of ideas through our heads, something that must be happening to you now, wondering when I'm going to shut up or when lunch is going to be served, etc. 2, thinking as imagination or mindfulness, which is usually restricted to things not directly perceived, where you say things like, "I think I saw a tree," etc. 3, thinking as synonymous with believing, expressed in statements such as, "I think it's going to rain tomorrow." 4, reflective thinking as a chain of thought leading through inquiry to a conclusion, and this of course is Dewey's aim in defining and recommending reflective thinking as the basis of both rationality and action. I must however admit that the 7 suggestions I've made are largely components of what Simon Borg called, and this was in 2015 in Hyderabad, external teacher development, because the suggestions I've made are things that take teachers away from the classroom. Borg offers teacher research as an alternative to external training. He argues that teacher research is a powerful means of teacher development because of 3 reasons. 1, it's done by the teachers themselves. Teachers themselves are the researchers. 2, it takes place in teachers' working contexts. That is, the site for teacher research is the classroom itself or the school where the teacher is employed. And 3, its purpose is to enhance teachers' work, enhance in terms of quality. That is, teacher research allows teachers to understand themselves, their teaching, and their students, and this understanding may also contribute to the growth of the institution the teachers work in. So he argues that there's a positive correlation between personal teacher development and institutional growth. Borg justifiably therefore claims that teacher research provides an option which allows teacher development to be ongoing, inexpensive, integrated into teachers' routine work, personalized and practical. I began by referring to the ideal teacher. let me finish with that by referring to that grand old man of VLT, Peter Strevens, who passed away some years ago. And when he visited us in our university in London, he gave a talk. He claimed that an ideal teacher possesses personal qualities, technical abilities, and professional understanding. Under personal qualities, Strevens included inherent qualities and other qualities acquired through experience, education, or training, including a sufficient command of the language he's teaching. Under technical abilities, he mentioned the ability to discern and assess the progress and difficulties of her pupils, a fluent and responsive grasp of classroom skills and techniques, and a creative familiarity with the syllabus and materials being used in her classes. Professional understanding for Strevens refers to a sense of perspective that sees the teacher's own particular task in relation to all types of language learning and teaching situation, to an awareness of trends and developments in language teaching, and to an acceptance that it is her professional duty to go on improving her professional effectiveness throughout her career. And Strevens expanded these ideas into a lovely paper in 1988. Henry Adams said, "A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops." Most of you must have read that wonderful novel, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, by James Hilton. The story of a legendary schoolmaster who spends a lifetime at Brookfield Public School in the south of England. And in this little novel, that is an inspiration to teachers everywhere, there's a reference to 3 generations of a family that Mr. Chips taught. And I quote from this little novel, "And years later, when Colley was a government official in London, he sent his son, also red-haired, to Brookfield, and Chips would say, 'Colley, your father was the first boy I ever punished when I came here 25 years ago. He deserved it then, and you deserve it now.'" How they all laughed, and how the father laughed when his son wrote home the story in next Sunday's letter. And again, years after that, many years after that, there was an even better joke. For another Colley had just arrived, son of the Colley who was a son of the first Colley. And Chips would say, punctuating his remarks with that little that had by then become a habit with him, "Colley, you're a splendid example of inherited traditions. I remember your grandfather, he could never grasp the ablative absolute in Latin. A stupid fellow, your grandfather. And your father too, I remember him, he used to sit at that far desk by the wall. He wasn't much better either. I do believe, my dear Colley, that you are the biggest fool of the lot." Personally, I remember one teacher, my first teacher, who had a huge influence on me, Mrs. Ball at St. John's High School in Bangalore, who had also taught my father 30 years earlier in the same school, and who never let me forget that my father had been a superior student. I'm now a retired teacher. For most of the 43 years and more I taught, I was enthused and eager to get to work every morning. But there was, of course, the odd morning when I had to drag myself to work. Fortunately, tomorrow morning, for instance, I don't have to get up early and rush to work. But you, ladies and gentlemen, other than Raju and me, you don't have that luxury. So here's a poem, short poem, won an award by Gregory Harrison that will make you think about your role as teachers, principals, and school heads. It's a conversation between a mother and her son and is titled, Distracted, the mother said to her boy. Distracted, the mother said to her boy, do you try to upset and perplex and annoy? Now give me 4 reasons, and don't play the fool, why you shouldn't get up and get ready for school. Her son replied, well, mother, you see, I can't stand the teachers and they detest me. And there isn't a boy or a girl in the place that I like or in turn delights in my face. And mother said, I'll give you 2 reasons why you ought to get yourself off to school before you get caught. Because first, you are 40. And next, you young fool, it's your job to be there. You're the head of the school. Happy teaching. Thank you very much.
That you were listening with rapt attention, and I'm sure that there must be some questions that you're waiting to ask
Comments.
the professor.
Comments
or questions, whatever you like. So the session is open for questions or comments. You have some.
Please start.
Madam.
Yes,
Sir, I'm Dr. Hemlata. I'm working for Academy for Creative Teaching.
Oh, right.
And where we also we've been concentrating on the quality of the teachers.
Right.
And that's when you made a mention of the EPD, 7 EPDs that we need to take care for enhancing the quality of the teachers.
CPD.
CPD, sir, CPD.
Right.
So would you mind throwing some light on the third component, that encouraging the faculty to the specialized courses, sir? Some online courses which you are
Right.
familiar, sir.
Right. What I have in mind basically are now free online training courses that are available if you can get in touch with, let's say, RELO, Regional English Language Office, located in Delhi. The British Council too has helped some of our scholars register for some of these courses, but of course the British Council pays the tuition fee, and so does RELO. And some of the best universities now offer intensive courses spread over 4 to 6 weeks, not more, but you have to spend a lot of time at the computer, video conferencing, but I noticed my own colleagues who have done these courses seem to have benefited a great deal from doing these programs, because they say now they are in a position not only to do a better job of the courses they are already offering in those areas, but actually think of offering a new course altogether at the master's level, right? That's what I basically was thinking. So not being able to get away for 1 year to do a residential postgraduate diploma in the teaching of English at Hyderabad is not necessarily an excuse anymore. I mean, obviously if you can come there, great. But if you can't, you should be able to do this. Right, I know. There are several here who've done the PGDT. Yes, sorry, Sandhya.
May I just add to what you have said?
Yeah.
Maryland University also in USA
Yes,
is offering,
Maryland, yes.
and Oregon University also.
Right.
And in
Oregon and
NCRT, sir, we are also offering this Action Research course on
Yes.
Action Research.
Yes.
So that is very important,
Yes.
and we are getting quite a number of applicants.
Right.
NCRT is doing,
Right.
because sir was talking about Action Research. Teachers' research is a powerful means of teacher development.
Yeah.
So that also, like, you can apply for
Yeah.
that.
In fact, if you can get in
NCRT.
touch with the British Council, Calcutta now, because Debanjan is the director there, they actually sponsor action research every year. So 30 to 40 practicing teachers are given a small sum of money to work on pet areas, that haven't simply troubled them, but which they feel they must deal with. So they give us a proposal of what they intend doing over the next 6 months. And if the proposal is convincing enough, a sum of money is sent to them. It's a small sum of money. It's meant to take care of their everyday expenses. And about a year later, we did this for 5 years. They would come to the Teacher Educators Conference, and the day before the conference, they would report their findings, their insights, etc. And we then have a discussion. So Rama Matthew, who you've heard of, Richard Smith, and I generally conducted this. So action research, I think, is exactly what Simon Borg is talking about. He doesn't use the term action research, but obviously that's what teacher research is all about. Something you do in your own classroom, right? Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, while referring to
Michael Wallace,
Yeah,
you said that professional competency is not a terminal point,
that's right.
but a point of departure.
Right.
Could you please elaborate on it?
Yeah, it's like this. Simply because we have obtained a PGDTE from EFLU, it doesn't mean we are now Mr. Knoll or Ms. Knoll or whatever, right? Perhaps that's only the beginning of a longer journey. So essentially we're saying we need to continue to evolve as teachers. And the only way of doing that is to do things like action research, doing smaller online courses, attending conferences, joining online network associations, and so on. That's what we say. So the certificate is certainly important professionally. That's what gets you a job. Without a B.Ed, you cannot become a school teacher. We acknowledge that. But that perhaps is only the beginning of what should be a long, long journey of development. That's the sense in which...
So in a sense, point of departure in the sense, getting ready for...
Yes, use that to work, to continue to work as a professional. Yeah.
Intense behavior for a teacher.
Right. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. A little louder, yeah.
Switch it on.
Sir, I would like to ask one more question here.
Yeah.
So you have been talking about the critical thinking and problem solving areas.
Right.
So in the UK, one of the part of the teacher education is
Right.
in such a way that
Right.
it's mentioned in such a way that in order to curb the effect of the poverty into the classroom transactions, can it be a part of the critical thinking and the problem solving?
Dr. Prabhu referred to problem solving, right? In the context of how you deal with a text, right? Now I'm just looking if I can look for one concrete example, right? Now here's a text that appeared in a book I prepared a long time ago, right? Now, when you have a text and you're a materials producer and you're preparing work, editorial work for the teacher to use eventually in the classroom, you're obviously going to have a mix of comprehension questions. And Dr. Prabhu referred to two types, factual and inferential, right? Obviously, there are more, right? But there is also a case for dealing with texts that should make the learner think seriously about the link between the text and himself or herself. Now, we often call that extrapolation or personalization, right? Now, that is an area that doesn't figure too prominently in language training, language teaching courses, and hardly finds any mention in a textbook. Because a textbook has a series of questions, and you need comprehension questions to help learners maneuver their way through the text, and the teacher is the intermediary. But there is a case for perhaps asking just one question, right? Now, can I just read this? It's a familiar story. There was a man who had 2 daughters. The girls grew up and got married. The elder daughter married a potter. The younger one married a gardener. After they were married, each daughter went to live with her husband in his village, and both of them were very happy. One day, the father decided to visit his daughters. First, he went to visit his younger daughter who had married the gardener. The girl was very happy to see her father. She invited him into the house and he asked her, "How are you, my child?" "We're very happy, father," she said, "but life is difficult. It's not raining. If there is no rain, we'll be in trouble. All my husband's plants will dry up. He'll have nothing to sell, and then we'll have nothing to sell, right? And eventually, we'll have nothing to eat," she says. "I hope it'll rain soon." The man listened to his daughter and said, "Don't worry, my child. I shall pray for the rains to come soon. I'm sure God will listen to my prayers." He took leave of her, went to the next village. He went to the house where his elder daughter lived with her husband, the potter. She too was very happy to see her father. "How are you, my child?" he asked. "Very well, father," replied the girl. "The sun is shining. It's very hot. People come to us every day to buy pots to keep their water cool. My husband's business is doing very well. The hot sun helps our pots to dry fast. I hope it doesn't rain. If it rains, our pots won't dry. Also, if it rains, people will not buy pots." The father stayed there for a while and then left. As he walked back to his village, the poor man did not know what to do. One daughter wants rain, the other doesn't. If it does not rain, my younger daughter will be hurt. If it rains, my elder daughter will suffer. What am I to do? Right? Now, of course, you can have a series of comprehension questions based on the details. But in a course in critical reading, for instance, what is perhaps important is to ask a question like, what would you have done if you were in the father's position? Right? Can you think of a solution to the problem? Right? So that, I think, is what is very often missing in our textual exploitation in books. So I think that's the point I was trying to make. Okay. Thank you.
That I think will be the last.
Sure. Thanks.
So my question is regarding the NCFTE principles of teacher education. You have said that multicultural and context-sensitive facts.
Yeah.
I just want to know how we can incorporate this in designing our curriculum.
Well, that will be a long discussion. What we are suggesting is to not lose sight of the fact that we have such a variety of experiences that we can expose our little children to, right? Right here in India, such a wide range of cultural traditions that can all figure in our classrooms through, obviously, textual material. Of course, there is the flip side to it, and as materials producers, we have often suffered. I won't mention the year, etc., but you can guess what the political ideology represented at one point. We were advised at one point to have extract stories, etc., and someday I would remember, even in the 80s, NCRT, extracts from the Indian epics, from the Bible, from serious devotional Sikh literature, and so on. Right? But there came a time when regimes changed, right? When we were told to keep off all references to religious texts out of classroom materials. It wasn't explicitly mentioned anywhere, but this was clear from the meetings we attended at the NCRT, simply because they were saying that you may find it difficult, for instance, to find a story representing a particular group, a community. But you might have access to lots of texts representing the culture of another community. So your representation might become lopsided, right? And they were also thinking of the teachers. Some teachers might either feel offended or might go overboard in promoting one particular religious text, etc. So essentially what happened then was we ended up Bowdlerizing, sanitizing our textbooks, right? Which is not a good thing either, right? Because we obviously want material that will enable children to think, to respond as individuals to issues. I think that's the context in which NCFT promoted this, and this was presented at a seminar. Raju was there with Mohan Raj leading it at EFLU. So this teacher education conference. So this was actually discussed. So it's general advice. It's not easy. It's not easy to put into practice, I must tell you, because you're not going to please everybody doing what you're doing. Right.
So I think that will have to be the last question for the session, because the professor has to leave in just 10 minutes.
Don't worry.
And the question that I wanted to ask him, I'll hold.
No, please.
I won't ask you. No, much. I know. I mean that's fine, because I'll ask the audience maybe tomorrow or the day after. That's okay. So his lecture was tightly packed with a plethora of ideas, peppered with anecdotes, and I think this is something that we are going to carry back with us. I won't even attempt to in any way synthesize what he said, because there were far too many ideas, and I think I'll be doing him injustice if I tried to kind of condense it into 5 minutes. So, but I think that running through the whole keynote address and underpinning it was the need for reflective practice on the part of the teacher. So thank you so much, Professor Paul Gunashekhar, and I hope, and I know I'm echoing the sentiments of those who are present here, that we'll get to hear you on another occasion, less rushed.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah.